Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with part 3 of my July wrap-up. So these are finally the rest of the books that I read in July. Parts 1 and 2, all the links I talk about will be in the description box, and let's get into it. So the first book I read in this part of the wrap-up was Hearts of Briarwall by Krista Jensen. I received this copy in exchange for an honest review, so thank you so much, and I do already have that spoiler-free review posted, so I will link that down below. But just very briefly, this is a proper romance in the Edwardian era. We're following Lydia Wooding and Spencer Hayes. Spencer is Lydia's brother's friend, and they're just reconnecting after like quite a few years. Spencer has come back to ask his friend Andrew if he will invest in a business idea he has, but that's connected to automobiles, and for reasons that we find out in the story, Andrew wants nothing to do with cars, and Lydia is very interested in them, very excited about them, and so Spencer and Lydia end up bonding over that and spending a lot more time together. Of course, the relationship develops, but there are complications between them, partly related to some secrets in Spencer's past. And this was not my favorite of this proper romance line books that I've read. I gave it 3 stars, so it was fine. I liked Lydia and Spencer well enough, and they had some good scenes together, but overall I just wanted more from the romance. There were also some revelations later in the book that I don't think were dealt with appropriately exactly. I don't know, I just felt it was kind of weird the way some things were handled. And I did like the friendship group, the female friendship between Lydia and some friends of hers, and the way this book talks about feminism and the suffrage movement and everything. But then there were also some ways that that was handled by the other characters that I wasn't happy with, so there were some pluses and minuses for this one. Again, check out my review for my full thoughts, but I gave Hearts of Briarwall 3 stars. Next, I finished A Darkness at the Door by Intisar Kanani. This is the second book and the final book in the I don't know, the Theft of Sunlight duology? The whole kind of connected world is the Dauntless Path series, and this is a sequel to The Theft of Sunlight. We're following our main character, Ray. At the beginning of the first book, she ends up going to the palace, traveling to court to find out what is being done about these people that they call snatchers, who kidnap children, and they believe they are enslaving them and trafficking them. And Ray is really upset that none of the officials seem to be doing anything about this. They don't even believe it's happening, and Ray is determined to do something about that. And so in the second book, some big things happened at the end of the first one. Ray is trying to escape the situation she's in and carry the information that she has back to the palace and to basically catch the bad guys. She's assisted by the thief lord Bren, who we know from the first book. She also meets some new allies as well as enemies along the way. And this was such a fantastic finale. This was so satisfying as a conclusion. I love Ray with my whole heart. I kept thinking while I was reading this book that her and Tarasai from the Raybearer series would be such good friends, and that makes me so emotional thinking about it because I love both of them. I just love the way that Ray is so she's very blunt and straightforward, but she has just the best heart, and she also recognizes logically she knows that she can't save every single person in the world who is suffering, but she also knows that she has to try. And I just love that about her. I also love the way that over and over Bren is this is impossible, but obviously I'm going to help you. I love their relationship and dynamic. The yearning between them is so good. I just love both of their characters separately and together. I really like that we got to see Ray's family more in this book. I really enjoyed some of the other side characters we meet along the way. I really enjoyed the fantasy elements in this book. That was one of my only critiques for Thorn and The Theft of Sunlight, is that they felt a little bit, I don't know, it was a little clunky the way those were integrated into the story, but here I think it worked really well, and I actually really enjoyed the way the fantasy aspects played into the ending of this book. I found that really interesting, and I really liked that. And I love what this book looks at thematically, the way it talks about justice versus mercy and making hard choices. We see our main characters have to make these really unpleasant choices, and we see them do things, Ray especially struggles with this, where she does things that are she hates that she does them, but she also knows that if she had to do it again, she would, because it was the best option they had. And I just think the way that was handled was so thoughtful. This book also has very, very high stakes. I think those were communicated really well. I love, just in general, the way Intisar Kanani writes, the way she balances character and plot and themes, and also the way she balances tone. This series is very, very dark in some places, but there's also moments of hope and lightness. The Pirate Queen material shirt that I'm wearing is an example of that. I just think she's so good at storytelling. And I also really loved the end of this book. I found it really satisfying. I'm very impressed with the way that this author could balance these very, I don't know, it's hard to pull off an ending that is satisfying in a lot of different ways, and that like takes into account the realities of the story while also like giving enough resolution, you know? So I think this one did a really great job with that. I loved it, and I gave A Darkness at the Door 5 stars. Next, I finished my reread of 10,000 Stitches by Olivia Atwater. As I said for the first book, this is kind of a reread and kind of not, because this is the traditionally published edition. I loved it just as much as the first time I read this book. Yeah, like this series is really going to become, I think, probably a comfort reread for me, even though like it balances comfort with these really serious ideas in a way that I love. I also think it's funny that I think it was in my mid-year book freakout tag, like for the bookish crush question, I talked about the first book, and then I also said I think maybe the second book would be on there as well, but I'll have to reread it to see. And I find that funny because after rereading this book, not only do I firmly put this on the book boyfriend shelf, but I think out of all the books I have shelved there, this is probably one of the ones that I would actually like most get along with, you know, that personality wise we'd really click and get along. So I think that's funny. But anyway, so this is a very, very loose Cinderella retelling. This is set after the events of the first book, so I would recommend reading this series in order. And we're following Effie, which is short for Euphemia Reeves, who is a maid in a wealthy house, and at the beginning of the story, she finds herself developing a crush on the young man of the house, and she's like, this is bad news, nothing can come of it, I'm just gonna ignore this. But she ends up with a very enthusiastic and well-meaning fairy godfather, who's Lord Blackthorn, who we briefly met in the first book, and he is determined to become more virtuous, but his ideas about what are virtues are a little incomplete, or he has like the best heart and the best intentions, but he makes a lot of mistakes. But he's determined to help her marry this young man like that she's in love with, you know, who's one of the family members that she serves, and their deal is that he's going to help her, and if she succeeds in marrying him, then, you know, she gets her true love and her heart's desire and all that. If she doesn't succeed, then she gets whisked off to be a maid in fairy instead. That's kind of the bargain, and they have the length of time of like 10,000 stitches. Like I really love the way that embroidery is such a prominent part of this book. We know I love that. And yeah, I love this book so much. I love Effie as a main character. She is just, I don't even like know how to describe her, but I love her. She is once again one of those characters who is very practical, but we also see that she can be very whimsical, that she's kind of had to, like, because of the position she's in, she's kind of had to train herself not to dream too much almost, not to be too romantic, you know, not to hope for better, but then also there's obviously this instinct to hope for better anyway, and I just really love her. I love the way that she is so angry about injustices and determined to do something about them. But I also love the way this book talks about how not everybody has the same options when it comes to standing up to people. Like I love the way this book dealt with class, and it talks about like privilege and the way that like different, like people don't always, like I said, don't always have the same like options or stakes when it comes to like talking back to people. I thought that was done really well. I love the way that this book is just so focused on like the dignity and the worth of everybody, of every person, and the way that like we see Effie and the other servants, including her friend Lydia, who I also enjoyed, including Effie's brother, like all of these servants are treated as less than human. Like they're just treated as objects to make the wealthy family's lives easier. And this book is so, like the way it fights back against that, I just love. I love this way this book talks about anger, especially like the transformative anger of women who see things wrong and who try to do something about them, but also the way that even if you don't have options, even if you can't fix something, the way that like anger can be a kind of strength and a determination to survive until you can do something. Like I just love that. I also really love the romance. It uses a couple of my favorite tropes in the world, so that's always fun. I continue to love Olivia Atwater's writing. I just really, really love everything about this book. It just makes me so happy. I would say that in terms of like how much the romance plays a part in it, I think compared to the first book, the romance is like a less of a focus, but I do still really enjoy it. Like I can see some people wanting more from it, but I loved it. I just love everything about this, like I said, and I gave 10,000 Stitches 5 stars. Next, I finished History Smashers, The Underground Railroad by Kate Messner and Gwendolyn Hooks. This is a very short nonfiction in the History Smashers series, which I have been really loving. It's a series of like nonfiction books intended for younger readers, but I think obviously adults can get a lot out of them as well. And they're formatted in a way that is like very easy to follow, very engaging. They have like illustrations and like kind of graphic novel sections that I loved, and I really loved this one as well. So this is obviously about the Underground Railroad, but what this book does, which I really enjoyed, is that it kind of takes a wider view. So a lot of the myth busting is about the Underground Railroad specifically, and kind of like misconceptions or like things that people think they know about it, but it also goes all the way back to the like pre-slave trade African cultures, talks a little bit about them and what rich and like, you know, incredible cultures these were. And it also talks about the beginning of the slave trade and a little bit about that. And then it gets into more of like the Underground Railroad and like resistance to slavery and all of that. I loved this. Like I said, I learned a lot from this because we definitely talked about the Underground Railroad, but there's still lots of things here that I didn't know. One thing, which is actually makes a lot of sense, but perhaps unsurprisingly, we never actually learned this specific thing in schools, is that the majority of people who helped people escaping slavery on the Underground Railroad were other Black people, which makes a lot of sense. But from the way that it's talked about in textbooks, you probably thought that like white Quakers were like one of the people, were like the majority of people helping, which they definitely did do some amazing things. This book is not saying they didn't, but it's like, I don't know, just most of the people who were helping were not white people. I just thought this was so well done. Like I said, it's very engaging. I love the layout. I also feel like this book doesn't talk down to the reader. Like, it's accessible, but it's not condescending. And I really appreciate the like nuance about like various like topics in this. Like it talks about, for example, the like quilt. The idea of like quilts being coded messages about safe houses on the Underground Railroad. And this book talks about how like that that idea is based on, I think, like a specific family who like had this in their family lore, and they talk in this book, they talk about how we don't have written evidence that this was actually like a thing that, you know, a lot of people did. But this book also points out the importance of oral history for African Americans, and how that's not something to be discounted. So the fact that we don't have written confirmation doesn't mean it didn't happen. Like, for a long time it was forbidden to teach Black people to read or write, and so naturally a lot of the history would be oral, and that was a very important thing. And then also it would not be a good idea to write down records of the things that you were doing to help people escape. So there's like multiple reasons why we wouldn't necessarily have records for this, and I just really appreciate the way it talks about that. There were a couple of little things that I think could have been worded differently or better. Like, one of the things, the book emphasizes a few times the like bravery and determination necessary for enslaved people to escape, which is very much true, but the way it was said a couple times almost made it sound like, I don't know, just like, kind of the implication is like, okay, so if people were caught, does that mean they weren't brave or determined enough? Like, I don't think that's what this book was saying, but I just think it, I don't know, it could have worded that differently, especially for a book that is so very thoughtful and clear and intentional with its language generally. Like, one thing I thought was that I really enjoyed is the way that it, at the beginning of the book, it talks about what words it's going to use for people. And one of the things it says is, instead of like fugitives or runaways, they call them freedom seekers, like people who are like escaping slavery and seeking the freedom that they deserve. And it's really interesting because when I was reading that, I was really glad that they were going to use a different word for it, because yeah, that always has kind of had the implication of like rule breakers, you know, who should have been satisfied, but you're not. So I was glad they were changing the word. But then when I was reading that part, I was like, oh, interesting. Like, I wonder if that's going to be a little bit like clunky or awkward feeling, but then the way the rest of the book was written, it actually fit really, really well. So I just wanted to mention that. But anyway, I really loved this, and I gave the Underground Railroad 5 stars. Next, I finished Heidi by Joanna Spyri, and this was translated, translated by Eileen Hall, cover illustration by Anna Bond, and interior illustrations by Cecil Leslie. Because there are some like original drawings here. And this was our Past It Classics pick. I'll link that live show. Julia was the host for that one, and this was so lovely and cozy. This is a children's classic set mainly in the Alps, the Swiss Alps, following our young girl Heidi, who is an orphan who is sent to live with her grandfather, who she's never met. And he's kind of known as this like grumpy, gruff old man, but he's actually not. We find out more about his backstory, and he and Heidi just end up having this really lovely bond between them. But then Heidi is sent to live in Frankfurt for a while, to be a companion to a young girl there. and Heidi's really unhappy there. She misses home, she misses her mountains, and then she eventually does go back, and we just see the way that like Heidi really brightens up the lives of basically everyone around her. There's obviously a big focus on nature, also a lot about like education and like the right way to like raise children or to like have kids grow up. And I thought this was really lovely. This is technically a reread for me, but it's been so long that it pretty much was like reading it for the first time. Like it's been probably more than 15 years since I read this book, which is wild to think about. But yeah, I really enjoyed the writing. I loved the like coziness of this book. I really enjoyed Heidi as a main character. Like she didn't feel like too sugary sweet, you know, like she was very endearing and engaging, but not in an annoying way. Like I feel like sometimes these kinds of characters can be. I just really enjoyed the characters in general, actually, and I was really glad that this book averted the like, I don't know, children's classic trope of like every adult except like one is evil. This book didn't do that. I also think some of the themes and like the way it dealt with those was like surprisingly balanced. Like obviously this book is very much on the side of like children should be in nature and that's really important, but it also talks about the importance of like learning how to read, like that there is value in education as well. So I really appreciated that. I will say that the first half of this book I enjoyed a lot more. I found it a lot more engaging. The second half felt a little more dull to me. It's not that I didn't like the stuff that happened, but I just think that I don't know, it could have been written more engagingly, or I don't know, for whatever reason the second half didn't like, you know, pull me in quite as much, but I did still enjoy this book a lot. I think also parts of the second half felt a little more heavy-handed in terms of the themes, whereas other parts in the book it was prominent, but I feel like it was worked into the story better. But overall I did really enjoy this, and I gave Heidi 3.5 stars. Oh, I can't believe I forgot to mention, but like probably my favorite character was Sebastian. I love him. Like I loved him and all his nonsense that he got up to. He was just such a fun character. Probably least favorite was Peter. He got on my nerves, and I feel like we were supposed to like him a lot more than I did. So next I finished Blackfoot by W.R. Gingell. This is the second book in the Two Monarchies sequence, which when I was talking about the first book, I said that I feel like these are going to be kind of loosely connected companion novels, and I actually think these are more connected than I thought. So I do recommend reading these in order so far. And this one we're following Annabelle as our main character, and we know that she was like kidnapped by a witch as a baby and kind of used as like a magical power source. She had a really, really horrible like upbringing with this witch, and then some things happen where she thinks another like evil magic user is going to like try and like use her for their magic, and which will kill her. And so her and her friend Peter and Annabelle's cat companion Blackfoot, who she can like speak with him and hear his thoughts and everything, or they like speak in her mind, they end up like fleeing. Blackfoot tells them to go into these like castle ruins, and that's the only way they'll be safe from this like evil magician person. And then the castle starts like gradually rebuilding itself, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. Annabelle is like kind of fighting the fact that she's supposed to do some important things. Like she's always used to being overlooked. That's kind of been her survival skill, is like playing dumb and playing like she doesn't understand things. And yeah, this was a very interesting book. I feel like this is not going to end up being one of my favorites in the series overall, but I did enjoy a lot of things about it. Like I love Annabelle as a main character. I loved seeing her character growth and like kind of coming into her own strength, and I really, really enjoyed her. Apparently not everybody does, but I really liked her. I also found the setting really interesting. Like a lot of the book, the majority of the book is at this same castle, but I didn't mind that. Like I found that very interesting, and the way that kind of played into the mystery aspects of this castle and like the magic stuff that these characters are figuring out. But I had a couple of like pretty significant issues with this one. One is Peter. I don't know what the theme is. Like I had a couple of Peter characters in a row who I didn't like, but this Peter was way worse. He's such a little shit. Like I could not stand him for like most of the time he was in this book. Like there's still times where I felt sympathy for him, but like in terms of liking him as a character, absolutely not. Like the way he treated Annabelle made me furious, and Annabelle was just kind of used to it, so she wasn't always as bothered by it, but I was bothered on her behalf. Like the way he like talks about her body, the way he calls her stupid, like he's just like a little brat. And I don't feel like enough of that was like apologized for. And like Blackfoot is also kind of like mean to Annabelle a lot of the times, but I feel like with him it's a little more understandable because Blackfoot is trying to like goad Annabelle into kind of like accepting that she's better than she thinks she is, you know, which I still think Blackfoot could have been nicer to her, but I see his intentions at least, Peter was just awful to her a lot of the time. And like, we're supposed to really care about their friendship. They're two of the three main characters. And so the fact that I didn't like their interactions, like anytime they were like talking to each other or had a scene together, I like wasn't having a good time. Like, I just did not buy their friendship. I think Annabelle could do better. I just, yeah, was not a fan of Peter. He's just so like full of himself and nasty to her, and I did not like that. And he was also one of the biggest perpetrators of my other issue with this book, which was the fatphobia. It was very unpleasant to read. I think that this is not the author's beliefs, I think it was the characters, but I still think that it was a really prominent part of the book when it didn't have to be, and that it should have been challenged more. Like, Peter just over and over says like really nasty things about Annabelle's weight and body, and I hated it. Like at one point, this makes me so mad, like at one point when they first get into the castle and they're trapped there, like Annabelle is upset and she's like, where are we going to sleep? Like, what are we going to eat? And Peter, of course, says something nasty to her about like, of course you would want to know that or something. And just like the idea of like fat shaming somebody, like, okay, it wouldn't have been okay either way, but the idea of doing that because somebody is concerned about being trapped without food is wild to me. Like, I just didn't like that. And there were other characters that also talked about Annabelle that way. Like, Peter was the worst about it, but there were other characters who did that too, and I didn't like it. And again, Annabelle was not always bothered by it because she was used to it, but I was bothered by it. And like, there were even like this character who we were supposed to like, and at other times I did like them, but like, they refer to Annabelle as like a blob a couple of times, and I just hated that. So like, yeah, like I said, I don't think this is the author's like beliefs, and I think we are clearly not supposed to like the way these characters treat Annabelle, but I still think we should have had less of it and that it should have been more explicitly challenged. So I just wanted to mention that. Like, it's not like a major part of the plot or anything, but it happened more frequently than I think it needed to, and I didn't like it. I also, like, as always, I put content warnings in the description box, but I do want to mention that this book involves a pretty significant like animal sacrifice scene at the beginning, and it's not graphic, and it's clearly something that is not like brushed over by the story. It is supposed to be very upsetting, and also because of some magical things going on, it's not quite how it would feel if it were in a more realistic context or setting. But I did want to mention that because I was worried that was going to happen when I knew what prominent roles animals were going to have in this book, and there is a scene at the beginning like that, so I wanted to mention that. But yeah, kind of mixed feelings about this one, but I am still excited to continue the series, and like I said, I think this is probably going to be like the one-off. From the look of the other books, I think I'm going to like the other ones a lot more, and I also am excited because the next book follows Annabelle as well, and it's like a magical school novel, so excited for that. And I gave Blackfoot 3.5 stars. And then we're ending on a very high note because the last book I finished in July is The Backwater Sermons by J. Holm. This is a very short poetry collection by a trans poet, and I really loved this. It's always hard to talk about poetry, so I'm gonna do my best, but like the topics this one explores are like grief, faith, humanity, like beauty and ordinariness, and it also talks a lot about the pandemic, so do be aware of that. I also, like, J. Holm has a like an introduction at the beginning of this where he talks about what it's like being a plague Christian, which I thought was very interesting, and I'm really glad that that short intro was in this book. And yeah, I just loved his poetry. Obviously poetry is very subjective, but I really like the imagery he uses, and I'm also really impressed at the way he can use repetitive like segments or like rhyme schemes. Like, they could sound very like sing-song or childish in another writer's hands, but here they just really worked. Like I said, I like the way this book explored the topics. There were like a lot of these poems were like really got to me. There's one about the idea of like angels working overtime hours that like brought tears to my eyes. Like, I just think this was a really beautiful collection. I'm very excited to continue reading more by this poet. I do wish there had been a little bit more of an acknowledgement of like why these things were happening. Like I said, a lot of this deals with the pandemic, and especially with like loneliness and isolation, and also being cut off from kind of like physical like places of belief. Like, because J. Holm, like, he talks a lot about like what an important part of his faith experience was connected to actually being in cathedrals and churches, and like these physical sacred spaces, and I thought he talked about those things really beautifully. And a lot of this book does deal with how hard it is to be cut off from those and to be cut off from people and community, and I totally get that, and I'm not minimizing that in any way, but I do wish that there had been an acknowledgement of why those things are necessary, and that, like, I don't know, like that there are very serious reasons why we had those things and why we should still be having those things. Like, this is a disease that is continuing to kill people, and we still have people who are acting like it's over. And so I don't know, it's something that personally I wish there had been more of an acknowledgement that like yes, these things are hard, but this is why we're doing them, and that wasn't so much the focus here. But I just still really love this poetry. I want to read just like a tiny segment from one. This is taken from a poem called The Edge of a Past Horizon. And stepping softly from the sea, the sand scraped all the fear from me. This salt, this cold, this honesty. I drew the waves deep into me, and by their rhythm came to see the man that I was made to be. Like, I just think his writing was very beautiful, and like I said, that rhyme is something that could feel very like sing-song or childish, but it doesn't. I just think he did a really great job. Obviously with any poetry collection, there's gonna be a few that don't work for you as well. Like, there were a few in the middle that I think didn't work quite as well for me, but overall I loved so many of these poems. It's funny because like, just as I was thinking like, oh, okay, maybe my favorite poems are all gonna be at the front, then I had just like a string of really, really fantastic ones that I really connected with near the end. So anyway, I loved this. I gave the Backwater Sermons 5 stars, and I'm very excited to read more from J. Holm. Okay, everybody, so those were the rest of the books I read in July. If you're still watching, thank you so much. I've been reading a lot, so I hope the 3-part wrap-up is not too annoying. But please let me know if you have read any of these, what you thought of them, or if you're going to pick them up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!